We're your co-hosts, Vicky and Laura, and this is the Resilient Entrepreneurs Podcast, the ultimate guide for ambitious business founders and startups. Hear from business heroes who faced unexpected challenges as we unpack how they slayed their dragon and reignite your instinct to conquer your dragon. In this highlights reel, you'll hear from the resilient entrepreneurs we've met this season, each with their own amazing story of overcoming tough to thriving. We hope this will reconnect you with your reason to keep going, your why. When something resonates, look up the full episode, bathe in their wisdom and experience. Episode 4, Mia Munro. We'd like to start with a bit of an icebreaker, and we want to know, what was your first job? And how old were you?
Well, I could go right back to when I had a pretend restaurant where I used to do toad in the hole with rocks and serve it to my parents. But I'll go to a real job. But my first job would have been as a nanny. But the job that soon after that one, the job that really meant something to me was when I was 15 years old. And I decided, I went to the local hospital, like a medical hospital, sort of aged care. And I decided that I wanted to be the first nurse aide in New Zealand who was 15. And apparently that's illegal. You're not actually allowed to work and get a job at 15. So I waited. I created a proposal, I believe. I don't remember a lot of this, but Mum tells me. And the second, it was the 1st of March of my 16th birthday, I had the chance to go in and become the first youngest nurse aide in New Zealand. So that was working alongside the nurses. So that was a pretty exciting story. And I guess kind of set me up for my whole life as an entrepreneur. I think if you start doing that stuff that young, it's a bit of an indicator that you're not really prepared to follow the mainstream, and you're probably going to be a little bit of a rebel, which has turned out that way quite accurately, actually. But yeah, amazing experience to go in at such a young age and start to, this is my mind, start to shape the future of the medical system at age 16.
Episode 15, Sandra De Silva.
I started my career, actually, I was living and working in the United States, and I was part of some incredible opportunities building technology, cutting edge technology, and really learning about a lot of the techniques in building quality engineered systems. So, a couple examples, I had worked for companies that developed software that was deployed to NASA and the Pentagon, and really just getting some of the know-how and insights of building technology. And when I relocated to Bermuda, I just found that there was a gap. There was a gap in local engineering capabilities and so much need. And really it was a supply demand thing. And so, I just had the ambition, and I thought, well, okay, well, there's a gap here that needs to be filled. And I enjoy building and architecting and innovating. And so it was a natural fit for me to just say, right, I'm just going to do it myself.
I love that. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Every entrepreneur almost says the same thing. I was working in this, I saw this need, and I filled the need. I just think that's so amazing.
Episode 24, Raina Drake.
I was just going to ask you to go back to the beginning of your business and tell us a little bit about how you started out as an entrepreneur.
I have to say that I had the privilege of having a golden start. I really did. For me, it was exciting. It was fun. So I came into business, almost I fell into it, if you will. I have a law and politics background. That's what I studied. But on the side, I am really a fantasy buff and nerd. And so I'm a bit more hairy-fairy. So I never felt like I would fit within the legal, let's say, machine, because I felt it was too cold for my liking. But I studied law because I thought, oh, I want to change the world. And until I studied the law, I'm like, maybe the law and politics are the problem, you know. So I got a job with this gentleman who was a business strategist and had been so for 20 years, and he was a family friend at the time. So after writing a thesis that basically had me blacklisted from the law field, don't worry, my supervisor told me not to write it, and I said, "Wait, you're telling me not to do something? That's exactly what I'm gonna do," you know. So anyway, yeah, I ended up started working with this gentleman, and he was an ex-Navy guy as well. So he had that militaristic approach to things. So it was really interesting and informative seeing the way he viewed people, the way he studied body language in order to inform how he dealt with individual clients, what pressure points or how to frame his delivery essentially. And after working with him for a while, an opportunity came up to coach a young girl. And because throughout my education and university years, I'd been in leadership roles and I've mentored other students, he thought, hey, I think this would be good for you. And he recommended me to this particular family. And once I started doing that, it just blew up. It just went from there because I started coaching this young girl. And then the mom came on board because she's like, oh, I want in on this one. And then soon after, it happened to be a family that was quite well, I suppose they had a wealth of businesses. They had several businesses. And I started coaching their leaders and their managers, and yeah, the business sort of grew from there, and then it spread by word of mouth, and I got corporate gigs, and yeah, so it was pretty, I have to say, it was pretty smooth sailing to begin with, and exciting and fun.
Episode 25, Claire McDevitt.
I would wonder, Claire, because I know where you are now as an entrepreneur over the last few years. But what were you like as a kid? Was entrepreneurship in your life way back then? Do you have any stories?
So this is the weirdest thing, right? All my family have their own businesses, and it didn't click with me until 4 years ago when I started to do when I started my own business. When I looked at my family background, all my cousins, my parents, everyone had their own business. So I think entrepreneurship was there, but there was also a strong healthcare lead, and in the 80s it was like, go get yourself a good job, right? Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
So my options were either go get a husband and settle down and have kids, or get a job. So I wanted the job initially because I really wanted to travel the world. So entrepreneurship was definitely there, but it didn't click for me until I came actually to Bermuda.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think it's amazing too, because my family are all entrepreneurs as well. And I was terrified of being an entrepreneur. It wasn't something I thought that I wanted, younger in my career. But now I can't imagine not being. But I think having them already being entrepreneurs was helpful, because it wasn't like, oh, what are you doing? Are you crazy? It was like, right. Oh yeah, go for it. You need to make sure you do this tax thing and do that thing and do that. And it was like the advice was coming rather than the questions, which I think does help a little bit.
Episode 48. Davida O'Brien. You said that you came from an entrepreneurial background, but that you were late to the game. What did you mean by that?
So my dad he was in hotel and tourism, and he basically had his own construction business. So he started entrepreneurship really early, had developing that. He was also known as the soup man. It wasn't a business bringing in funds, but it was something that he was doing for the homeless, and he would just create soups and entrepreneur doing that. And then my sister, Dekio, who you may know from Wild Wing Wednesdays, had her own wing shop. And she has had multiple ventures. So she's always hustling through that entrepreneur game. And she's always encouraged me. And I was just like, life, got things to do. And I would just sit on these ideas. And then again, you stop to think, what am I teaching my son or leaving for my son, right? Like, you have an idea, you should move on it. If you have an interest, you should move on it. What does that look like? So I just came up with this. Thankfully, my sister has been very much supportive through this. Again, my family has been supportive. And so that's what I meant, but I'm just a late bloomer. Like, my sister's going through, I swear, like 6, and I'm just coming up with my 1. So gotta catch her up.
Episode 60, Eugenia Oganova.
Were you an entrepreneurial type kid? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I have never worked for anyone else. I cannot imagine doing that. I am neurodivergent, so I'm very different to begin with. And because of that, I've always had to figure out my own way, figure out how to translate what I'm seeing, feeling, and experiencing into words that human beings around me could understand. So I've always had something that I have done myself. And entrepreneurship, I didn't know that word back then, but that's just kind of naturally where I ended up being. I literally remember being like 2 years old and giving people advice. By the time I was 14, I already was seeing paying clients and essentially had a business, actually 2 businesses. And it just went on from there. So being able to source whatever my knowledge, my wisdom is from the inside instead of the education I got. That's actually the foundation of what I ended up now, like later on, many years later, working with my clients and teaching them. Because of course, like we all get educated over a lifetime, right? I've studied many things, I have many degrees and all of that, but nobody really cares. What they care about is who are you? So I never talk necessarily about any of those things. I talk much more about like, what is it that internally already known? That's what I call soul expertise. So if we're looking at when I was little, well, I was growing up in the Soviet Union, which is a very gray country. Everybody wore the same clothes. Entrepreneurship was illegal. Well, hell, rock and roll was illegal. Everything was illegal. Having a personality was illegal. And it was just a lot of fear, a lot of everything that's not me. And somehow within that, I managed to sort of under the radar do my work. And people hid me, protected me from somebody finding out that shouldn't, and so on. And that was right at the time when Soviet Union fell apart. So it was part of that big revolutionary kind of a breakup. And then I immigrated to United States and resumed my business here.
Episode 75, Abingdon Mullin.
Tell us a little bit about that and your family history so we understand a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So yes, I was born in England, but as you can tell, I have a very American accent. I was raised in California. My father's British, my mother's Mexican. So it was tea and crumpets and chorizo y huevos, for breakfast. It was kind of the norm. And I think that was a blessing, really, that I was afforded because what it's really done for me just as an entrepreneur is it started a foundation of having flux and just different cultures and different experiences from a multicultural household. It really set the stage for just how I view the world and seeing it not so, black and white or what we see on television or in other media, but actually experiencing it. And one of my favorite things, one of my favorite sayings is you just don't know what you don't know. And being raised in a household like that with 3 younger siblings, we got exposed to so many things when we went back to England or when we met up with our family in California. Just the differences in how both sides of our family were raising us was just, it was really exciting to be a part of. And I have to credit my parents for giving me such a wonderful childhood in that regard.
Were you an entrepreneurial kid?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, I was probably the most competitive brownie Girl Scout that you would have ever met. I had to outsell every cookie in the state of California. All the other Girl Scouts were terrified of me, but it it was still a lot of fun. I always, friendly competition is always a good thing. Yeah, I've been an entrepreneur since probably six years old when I sold my first Girl Scout cookie.
Episode 85, Susie Matson.
Can you tell us some of your backstory? What was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? And were you entrepreneurial as a kid?
Yeah, my childhood story is, I think, pretty different from many other kids because when I was 8 years old, my mom passed away from cancer. And then I had to live with my super abusive father, which I found out 6 months later after living with him that he was about to sell me to strangers in a foreign country down to Southern Europe. And I was only 8 years old. So my stepmother found this false passport and also one-way ticket, airline ticket to the following day, which put me in a situation that I needed to make a decision really quickly to save my life and to save myself from boarding that plane straight to hell. So the following day, I actually ran away from home. I was 8 years old and I had equal to $1 in my pocket. So that's the childhood story. And moving fast forward in 2012, I had a really successful coaching business around the world. And still, I found myself not living with purpose. I had success, but not fulfillment. So that was the starting point of going back and trying to connect the dots of understanding myself better and diving deep into the discovery of my childhood trauma. That's the story behind all this. And I came to a point where I couldn't identify myself with that little courageous, brave girl who ran away from home, but also follow through with action. So I decided to at least write her a letter to say thank you. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for being brave. And thank you for taking action. And in that process of writing that letter to my younger self, something really shifted in my body. And the pain and the burden that I had been carrying around for over 34 years, it felt like it belonged to the letter. It didn't belong to me anymore. So I thought it was really interesting. So that was the starting point of me studying how writing is healing and what specific factors do we need to address in a healing letter to ourselves. And also later on also discovered in which order do you need to address those factors, key factors, to set yourself up for healing and how we can turn past wounds into wisdom. So this whole story is the starting point of the Wisdom Writer and the For Me to You movement of writing a healing letter to yourself, but also sending in and provide your wisdom and pay forward that to other people who are currently in pain. So that's the story behind all this.
Episode 89, Lee Burgess.
So Lee, tell us your backstory. What kind of kid were you? Were you very entrepreneurial when you were growing up?
I think I actually was. So I grew up in rural East Coast Pennsylvania, so kind of country bumpkin-ish, but not even knowing it. Our family didn't have a lot, but I didn't know that either, the way that we grew up. My first job was mowing lawns, and I think that's where I figured out I was a little entrepreneurial. So I would charge different rates for basically the grade or how difficult the lawn was. And I would also do on demand so that if you wanted it faster, there was a premium service for getting it done sooner than later. I didn't have a lot of tools. I mean, when I started off, I actually didn't even have the little trimmers. We didn't have a weed eater back in then. I mean, we just didn't have a lot of money. I used scissors. So I think,
oh my God.
yeah, so they were really good scissors. When I wore gloves, I mean, I learned really fast, like how you get blisters and things like that. But I was 13 when I started mowing lawns. So I guess I had a little entrepreneur in me then. But I think as I went into college and things like that, I really never thought about being an entrepreneur.
Episode 106, Dr. Nikisha Hammond.
We love to start the podcast understanding a bit about you and where you come from, because our journey shapes exactly who we become, right?
I grew up in a single parent home. Was at that time, it was my mom and my brother and myself in the household. And from a very young age, it was interesting because although on paper, it looked like I was a model student and getting the straight A's and doing the community service in high school and sports and all the things. One of the things that was really missing for me was a conversation about mental health and self-care. So instead, what happened even in my early years was everything achievement-wise was overly celebrated, but not a celebration of like, oh, by the way, you need to also take care of yourself. So what that led to is going through college and going through graduate school, just this almost like operating like a machine, this go, go, go mentality, which definitely led to burnout for me multiple times before I was able to fast forward to now understand how important it is that yes, while you can be an overachiever or do all the great things on paper, you also need to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. So when I talk about mindset a lot, this is definitely a personal journey that stems from that, as well as professional. I've been in the mental health field now for 15 years. I've had a private practice for 15 years, and also speaking to different corporations and organizations about burnout prevention, because again, definitely know deeply what that looks like to be on the side of not making yourself a priority, hitting burnout, and instead now living a life of a commitment to holistic self-care while I'm taking care of others, right? To make sure that I'm making myself my number one priority, which is something I teach. So that has, in a nutshell, been my journey from childhood to now.
Episode 109, Colleen Slaughter.
Tell us a little bit about what childhood was like for you. Where did you grow up?
Oh, gosh. So this is what I mean about disrupting and vulnerability. Well, I grew up in Kentucky, which I would say overall is a really good place to live. It has significance when we talk about the fact that I ended up moving to Paris, right, from Kentucky. But as we're talking about my childhood, let's say I'm 52 and a half and I'm still working through it. So I'm an adult child of multiple alcoholics. My father was never in my life. I was a surprise to both of them. And my father just abdicated any kind of responsibility or anything. My mother, I would say bravely decided to have me, but completely ill-equipped. She had been kicked out of the house, let's say her parents' house. Especially her mother was ashamed as an Irish Catholic that my mom was unwed, and had my mom go live with her sister, my aunt, in Michigan at the time. And so it started off even in utero where my mom was pretty depressed. I mean, she had the rejection of two key people in her life. And I remember my earliest years as being the happiest when my mom, before she got into partnership with another man, because she was more available. It felt like that was just like Thelma and Louise in a sense, except that one of them was smaller, of course. And then once the man came in, my mom just has never been able to choose men that are healthy. So that obviously had an impact on me. There's certain fond memories I have, like I mentioned when I was young with my mom, and I have an aunt and uncle and cousins with whom I particularly had a really good time and really craved to go over and be with them. But overall, it was a childhood where I felt in the way, and that comes up a lot. That's where I do a lot around self-advocacy, and I felt tolerated. There was a lot of stress around money. And so I thought that money was the big reason for the problems. I didn't know that it was really alcoholism, right? And stinking thinking. Yeah, I've been on a huge journey, not only geographically from Kentucky here, but also emotionally and spiritually to not only change the physical geography, but the internal topography as well.
Episode 128, Cindy Jordan.
In your childhood experience, do you have any good stories there where it might have given you a little insight into the, entrepreneur you've become today?
I mean, it's interesting because before we started the podcast, you said, "Hey, what about your childhood?" And actually, like 3 or 4 businesses popped into my mind that I did probably before I was even 12 years old. But I think one of the most important lessons, I don't know that this was my favorite business. My favorite business was I did a haunted house in, like, we lived in Baltimore, which, is very city oriented. And so everybody would have little sheds in their like little square yard, and whatever was left over from dinner, I would go out and create like, a very interactive haunted house of which I would narrate. And like, maybe like if there was spaghetti left over, I'd make you like put your hands in that or walk through it or something like that. But until I think one of the moms in the neighborhood said that I was, fleecing her daughter out of her allowance. That was that. But the most important lesson I learned was, just like every other kid, like I did a lemonade stand or, Kool-Aid or whatever we were serving. And I remember coming in and saying to my mom that, I think I made $10. I just thought it was so much money. And she's like, yes, okay, well, the Kool-Aid I gave you is 50 cents. So I had to give her the 50 cents. And she goes, and you used the water and you in effect rented my my container and the little Dixie cup. So when it was all said and done, $1.50 of my profit went to my mom for the lemonade stand. So I always tell my CFO that was my first EBITDA lesson. So my mom was hard that way, but good. I mean, you learn that nothing's for free.
Episode 130, Annalisa Gooden.
I'd love to start at the beginning of your journey, if you don't mind. Where did entrepreneurship start for you?
I was an artist by trade before starting Catch and Release. So I got my undergraduate degree in painting and drawing. I studied abroad in Florence, Italy. I did art residencies. I did group and solo exhibitions. I had a studio. So I think I was always a bit interested in working for myself. I didn't necessarily know that would take the form of a company or in the form of being a tech CEO and raising venture money and all of that. But I think I always had the sort of desire to see a vision and shape it. I think actually the thing that drew me, in fact, to company building and away from the studio was a deep desire to work with a team and work with people. I found the studio to be very enterprising and entrepreneurial, and it was like every day was my own making, and that was amazing. And even the business side of the art world is an interesting nut to crack. How to stand out in a sea of other people, how to bring something to the world that has a perspective others would want to engage with and maybe even buy. But I was missing the team. I was missing people, and so when I got into the business that I'm in now, I think that was kind of attracted to me and attracted me to it and kept me in it. And it was actually the world of production, which I think the two of you can probably appreciate, which is a very fast moving, within a few weeks, you've got to make something real, and there's all sorts of stakeholders involved and different people playing different instruments to get the thing off the ground. So I loved the pace of that. I loved the deadlines. I liked the constraints. I didn't feel those constraints as much as an artist. Sort of, you could do whatever you wanted for however long you wanted. And that ultimate freedom, I think, felt a little bit not as exciting in a funny way as like deadlines and teams and getting it all done.
Episode 134, Suzanne Mariga.
I always like to start these podcasts understanding a little bit about you and your backstory. So tell us, were you that entrepreneurial kid with a lemonade stand? Where did that first sort of experience of entrepreneurship come up for you?
No, I was actually probably more of a nosy kid. That's probably the best way to put it. My dad was a CPA and he started his own firm and he ran it for almost 40 years. And he hired me when I was 14 to actually be a bookkeeper in his firm. It was kind of like a tax write-off and free daycare kind of combination for him. And he taught me how to do accounting for his clients. And, my dad's Chinese, my mom is Black. And, so a lot of his clients were like Chinese restaurants. And it was just amazing going in and going, where do you buy your food from? And what are you spending your money on? And things like that. And it was interesting because, when I went to college and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, the natural progression was really accounting because, I already knew how to do it and the classes were interesting and that compound growth. Right. They say that Malcolm Gladwell says it takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. And when most people are graduating from college, imagining already being an expert. So it was just a natural progression from that standpoint. So not only is hiring your kids a great tax write-off, but it's a great apprenticeship and experience for them too.